And one last thing, when we asked Dale to come and do his presentation, we asked him about a fee, and he said that he really didn't want to get paid. And we said, that's good because we don't have any money to pay you. No, he said he would like if we would take whatever we thought was fair and buy some books for the library for the children of different ages. And so out on the table you'll see a table full of different books, and those are the books that Dale has actually donated that we're purchasing for him to give to the Tucker for today. We appreciate that. So, man who doesn't like to toot his own horn or blow his own whistle, Dale Russell of Greenfield.
All right, it's a pleasure to be here. See all the smiling faces, except for the one right here in the middle.
Is this going to be long?
I will tell you when you can leave. All right. I have been a railroad buff most of my life. And it probably started when I was about 4 or 5 years old. My father took me down to the depot to see an engine that was broken down. And I thought that thing was absolutely huge. Well, there it is. There's a picture of it, and it was taken that day. I did not take it myself. I was 4 years old, about 4 years old. And I acquired some pictures a few years ago. That was one of them, and so I've been using it ever since. Give you a little background on me. I live in Greenfield. I've lived there all my life so far. I live with my beautiful wife of 29 years in the house I grew up in, and I'm third generation there. And my hobby is collecting railroad pictures and memorabilia. I have about, take her out, would you minute for a minute, Liz? I probably have around 14,000 pictures, mostly B&M. I love to share them. I love for people to look at them. And the one thing I like to tell everybody before I get started on these things, if you have anything kicking around your house and you don't know what it is, or you don't know, or you don't want it, go to the Historical Society or go to someone in town and ask them if they know somebody that would be collecting things. Show them this, because a lot of stuff like that ends up in the dumpster. I have many, many pictures in my collection that were rescued from a dumpster, that close to being into the dumpster. And they mean a lot to me, and things like that bring a smile to people's faces. You know, you might find out you have a Civil War relic that Eric Tenney would love to have in his collection, or whatever. So please don't throw things away if you don't know what they are. Find out first. Now, I'm going to ask a couple questions of you, and I'll take an answer later in the show. What was unique about the Antrim depot, the railroad depot? Does anybody know what that is? And there was one other thing that was unique about Antrim and the railroads, and I will get to that in a couple of minutes. One of the things that happens is railroads come through, they build these things, and then who knows what's going to happen with them afterwards. But I'm going to start with a little history, because the first railroads to come into this area actually came in from Nashua, and they came into Greenfield. And it stopped in Greenfield for a few years. And I have a picture of a stagecoach I'm going to show you in a minute. And that was a Greenfield Antrim stage. So people would get off the train in Greenfield, take the stage, and they'd go to Antrim, or they'd go to Peterborough, or they'd go to Hancock or someplace like that. Stoddard was another place they went to. I have a ticket in my collection of one of those tickets that was given to me by a man years and years ago. A really, really old guy. I think it was Bob Edwards was his name. The tracks got to Greenfield. They arrived there in December 31st, 1873. And like I say, they sat there for a while. And let's see if I can make this work now. One of the places they stopped on the way up through was this place called Russell Station, named for my forefathers. And you see the sign on the end of the building that says Russell is hanging in my office right now. So, as a ploy, the railroad was named the Peterborough Railroad because they thought people aren't going to invest in a railroad that's going to Greenfield. So they called it the Peterborough Railroad, and that helped with the investment. I also have stock certificates in my collection for that railroad. This is the Greenfield depot. This is the passenger depot. And as you can see, this one was probably taken in the 30s sometime from looks of the vehicle that's there. And in the background, you'll see a passenger train. So, many commercial opportunities arose from the railroad coming to towns. One of the things that was shipped from, some of the things that shipped from Greenfield were apples, potatoes, and blueberries in season. Other things were soapstone from the soapstone quarry in Francistown, lumber, cordwood, and ice. Ice was a big thing. They shipped a lot of ice to Boston. It was caught on the lakes in Greenfield. It was caught on some of the lakes over this way too later on in the years. But the railroad also worked in the opposite direction that brought tourists from the hot, sticky weather of the cities to the country air of the up here. And one of the places they stayed was in Antrim at Greystone Lodge. I have a picture somewhere of Greystone Lodge, and I don't think I have it with me today, but I do have it. One of the other places they stayed was in Greenfield, was a place called Mayfield House. The Mayfield House burned, and the new house that was built there was built in 1913, and that's where I live today. In the spring of 1876, ground was broken. Here's the Antrim and Greenfield station. That's the tavern in Peterborough. That was another destination. That is where the, well, I don't know what the name of it is this week.
People's United.
The what?
People's United.
People's United Bank, whatever it is this week. Unfortunately, that was torn down and made it, they put up that brick building, which I think they ruined the landscape by doing, but that's just my opinion. Spring of 1876, the ground was broken to Hancock, at a spot where the Manchester and Keene Railroad was going to cross the Peterborough and Hillsborough Railroad. And this was known as Hancock Junction at the time. It has since been changed because of the confusion sometimes with tickets. People were getting off at Hancock Junction thinking they were in Hancock, and they weren't. They were in Elmwood. So at Elmwood, what they changed it to Elmwood Station in later years. This is another station that was in Greenfield. This is South Bennington Station. South Bennington Station was in Greenfield. And this building, minus the canopy on the end, was moved to Hancock after the railroad got done with it. And that's the little building on the right going out of Hancock to it started that just burned. Elmwood was the railroad center of the area. I don't think I have. That's Elmwood. This one was taken in the 50s. I don't know if I have that. That's Elmwood Station. Very, very busy place. And I had, at one time, I've got a list of the passenger trains that went through there in one day back in the 20s and 30s, and it's just unbelievable the amount of traffic that went through there.
So where was this located, though?
What's that?
The location of this spot now?
It's, if you get off at Elmwood Road, off of 202, going towards Peterborough, if you get off Elmwood Road and take a left, it's the next left, you go over a little tiny bridge, and the road bends around, and it goes right down to about where the station, well, it goes down to the farmhouse, it was Elmwood Farm. And the station's not too far from there. Right now, there's a young man doing a project to become an Eagle Scout, and he's finding the locations down there. He's going to mark them all. He's going to put up kiosks. He's going to build walking trails. So anybody who wants to go down there, probably sometime next year, it should be done. And he's working very, very hard at it. I'll give the kid credit. So. The line to Keene through Elmwood was never very successful. And they had a little landslide down there at Rice's Trestle on January 9, 1934, and it severed the tracks. So from that point on, the train that would going towards Keene would only go as far as where that trestle was, which was called Coolidge Crossing. And Coolidge Crossing would be just off of Old Antrim Road, near where the Garens used to live. I've walked most of that line through there, and once that happened in 34, then of course in 36 we had the flood that did a lot of damage, and then about the time they got their breath back from all the damage from that was when the hurricane of 38 hit, and that really finished off. Not only did it finish off the Keene one, but it finished off the Hillsborough to Concord one, beyond Hillsborough, and it killed the one from Peterborough to Hancock. So the only trains in came through Greenfield, turned at Elmwood, went on to Hillsborough, and then back and turned at Elmwood again, and went on back to Nashua. And they did not, it was a time-consuming turn because they had to come down and go across the Diamond, back around the Y, and then go back across again to head to Nashua when they're coming back. So it was called the Elmwood Shuffle. It took a long, long time because of so many switches to throw in the process of doing it. And in 1952, there was a gentleman by the name of Ed Magoon, who was the track foreman for the Boston Maine in this area, and he connected the two with what they call Magoon's curve, and it's more than 90 degrees. And they all told me it wouldn't work, but apparently it did because it's still there and it's still usable. I think I just skipped one.
Try page up on your keyboard.
This is the Bennington station. This is in the original location, which, if you come to the railroad crossing in Bennington, going towards 202, the station's on the right. Originally, it was on the left. This is when it was on the left. The flood of 36 knocked it off its pins. When they picked it up, they put it back on, they moved it downriver a little bit so it was closer to the bridge, and that's where you see it today. The covered bridge This is the covered bridge that was in Bennington. In my books I have with me, I brought some photo albums with me. You people can look at them afterwards. There's pictures of that bridge being built. There's pictures of it. I believe I have a picture in there of it burning. And I was a young fireman at the time. I was on that fire. Probably one of the hottest things I ever saw in my life. We were parked over to the right where you see that concrete is where the controls are for the dam. We were parked there with a fire truck, and in front of our truck was so hot you couldn't put your hand on it from the heat from the bridge burning. The line from Hillsborough went on to Concord through what they called Emerson, which was part of Henniker. Actually, it was in the down where they just replaced the iron bridges on the old road. And that was Emerson, and if you saw a picture of the station, it looked just exactly like a house, which is what it was. The station was in the bottom of the house. The rest of the house belonged to the railroad, and they used it for living quarters for the help. This is also the covered bridge. And I will have to say, I rode through that covered bridge a few times on a train. Not that there was a tourist train, but when you're 12, 13 years old and you go down to the depot on your bicycle and you watch the guys shifting the cars back and forth and you just sit there with this kind of a sad look on your face. One of them was bound to come over and say, "We're going to Hillsborough this afternoon, would you like to go?" And you know what the answer was. So what they would do is they would get down to the Hopkins grain mill in Greenfield, and one of the guys would run into the office and tell my mother, "We're taking Dale to Hillsborough with us, we'll be back whenever." So I'd ride to Hillsborough with him on the train.
Wow.
How long would it take?
Well, it depends on whether we stop for ice cream or not. And depending on how many cars they had to take out and how many cars they had to switch at the paper mill and how many they had to switch at Hopkins Grain in Hillsborough. I don't remember them going to Hillsborough with much of anything else other than for Hopkins Grain, but I do know at one time they took for Valancourt fuel because the brick building that was just beyond where Valancourt used to be was a mobile distribution center. So they used to drop loaded cars of oil there, heating oil and stuff like that. Goodall Company in Antrim received stuff from the railroad. They used to, I can remember when I was young, that I can remember going over to the Antrim station with my backhoe and lifting teak pieces out of gondola cars that went over to Goodall to made into handles for their knives. The line from, and also they handled stuff for the woollen mills in Concord too, in Hillsborough also. And they received cars in Hillsborough up until the early 70s. And then the B&M cut back and was getting rid of some of the non-profitable lines, and that was one of them. So, and the only reason they came up here after that was the Bennington Paper Mills and Hopkins Grain Mill. In 1976, they had some money come available, I'm assuming through the United States government, grants or something, to do some work on the line and get the tracks back in good service, to get them straightened out. And they started replacing ties. They started in Hillsborough on a Wednesday, I believe it was. They worked Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Saturday morning they worked a while. Sunday morning at 3 o'clock, Hopkins Grain Mill burned. So they came down from Hillsborough with the crew to replace these ties, and they're rebuilding the line to a line that was probably going to be abandoned within a few years. And I can remember we had to get special permission to let them go through, and they had to come through with a cherry picker type machine and pick up the hoses from the fire trucks. And the work cars would go through, then they'd put the hoses back down, they'd turn around somehow, and I don't remember how they did it. But we had cars in Greenfield that burned during the fire that were on the tracks, and it was so hot there, the tracks warped. So they had trouble getting the cars out of there afterwards. So, but anyway, now the line is owned by the state of New Hampshire. It's being used only as far as Limeboro right now, although this is still an active line. All the way to the paper mill is still active, so you could see a train there anytime. You probably won't for a while, but there's been a lot of talk about doing different things. One of the things was Rhymes at one time. It talked about bringing propane up to Antrim from wherever they pick it up. I think it's someplace in New York State. Milford Bennington Railroad leases the line from the state of New Hampshire right now. They haul gravel from Lime Road down to the processing plant in Milford. But they do close down for the winter. They've already closed for this winter. But it is an active line down there. But it's the other side of South Limeboro, so you don't see them going through Limeboro at all right now. So now, I asked some questions. That is Antrim Station. And as you can see, there's another building out back there, and that was owned by Goodall Company, where they used to unload stuff. There's another picture of Antrim in my collection. I have a picture of a postcard taken at Antrim Station mailed in 1913, I believe, or 1909, from Antrim to Greenfield. It was mailed from my great-grandmother to my grandmother. And I don't even know where the card came from. It's in my collection. I didn't know who it was from. I knew it was addressed to my grandmother. But then afterwards I started reading it and trying to decipher exactly what it was. It was signed Ma, so it had to come from my great-grandmother. Oh, I think it was a classmate of Bob Edwards'. Now, I'll just skip that quick. That's another Antrim one. As they left Antrim Depot, they went on to Hillsborough, and they went to a little station called Holton. This building still exists today. It's now a residence. It belongs to the Clark family, I believe, over there. I looked and looked and looked forever to get this picture. And of course, as soon as I found it, I found two of them. But this is West Deering Station. I have no idea when it was taken, but I can tell you who owns the car. And it's a gentleman by the name of Moneypenny. And Mr. Moneypenny and this other gentleman that's standing there went around and took pictures of most all the railroad stations on the Boston and Maine. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of them. And every one of them, he has a picture of his car in it. That's the Hillsborough Covered Bridge. Another unique bridge in the fact that it had a walkway on the side of it. So people going back and forth to the windmills could walk across the river right there, so they didn't have to walk up the road or walk on the railroad tracks. That bridge also burned. That was done by vandals. That was when it was in a lot better shape. The one in Bennington was caused by sparks from a diesel locomotive. And if it hadn't been for the fact that the diesel locomotive and the cars were in Hillsborough, they probably never would have rebuilt it. That's the curved trestle in Hillsborough, taken from down on River Street. Does anybody have any idea why they built a lot of these wooden trestles on a curve? With a curve in it?
They had to turn the corner.
No, they did it so that the wind wouldn't shake it.
Really?
It was more stable
Yeah.
because it was turned like that. The one in Hancock was like that. The one in Antrim, the Hillsborough one, actually, I think, was probably because necessary because of the houses that were there and the way it was going. But they did build a curve into a lot of those just because it made them more stable.
His grandparents lived right beside that, Hillsborough.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
At the end of that curved bridge, from the end you were showing,
Yeah.
all right, there was a path that goes right up, I guess it's Main Street of Hillsborough. And they had wooden stairs right from the tracks all the way up so people didn't have to go downtown and walk around. And that went right beside the house where I used to live.
Oh, okay.
And then people would go to the mill, and that's how they took the shortcut.
Yep.
Go across the bridge and
Back up on the main
go to
street.
mill instead of going downtown and going up through.
Yep.
Your grandfather worked with
I had heard that years ago. There was a gentleman had a building right there. He had a collection of Mack trucks. It was a personal friend of mine, and he told me all those things about those. And like an idiot, I didn't write them all down, which I should have. All right, we're back to the questions I asked. Does anybody know anything? What the unique thing was about the Antrim Depot? Eric. It was in Bennington. And it's on property owned by some farmer over there now, right?
Used to be part of our farm.
Does anybody know anything more unique about the railroads in Antrim? The tracks actually never went into the town of Antrim at all. They stayed on the other side of the river, so they went from Bennington to Deering. And I have some maps, just in case anybody doubts my information, because I have a map showing the outline of the town of Antrim, and there's actually no railroad tracks in Antrim. Any other questions? Yes.
With railroad tracks, who made the decisions where they were gonna go?
They were surveyed by the people that were building the railroad.
Okay, so it wasn't the government, it was the...
It was private surveys, and a lot of times what it would do, you'd get a banker and maybe a couple of engineers and a couple of rich farmers or whatever, and they would all get together and say, we're going to build a railroad to Hillsborough or to Antrim or to Greenfield or whatever. And the whole intention was they'd get the property lined up, they'd get maybe the parts of it cut out and lined up, and they'd turn around and sell it to one of the railroad companies. That happened a lot. I think the Boston and Maine Railroad was made up of something like 296 different railroads over the years, such as the Peterborough Railroad that went from Wilton to Greenfield, the Monadnock Railroad that went from Winchendon to Peterborough and Jaffrey. So there was a lot of that went on. Eric?
I was going to say a couple of things about Antrim. In 1878, they had to raise Depot Street about 6 feet so that Antrim could take stuff over to Bennington.
Okay.
And I think they got a contest with Bennington who was going to pay for the bridge over the river.
Yeah.
They got built. I'm not sure about it.
You're not sure who built it, who paid for it, right?
Yeah. So
Question.
what was that? Oh, yeah.
What's that?
There was actually 2 stations in there.
There was 2 stations in there.
Yeah, the passenger station right next to North Bennington Road, actually. And then there was a freight yard and a freight station further down, about 500 feet down. And then Little Company owned the back, way down at the end of it.
There's the 2 buildings you're talking about right there.
I think that might have been.
And then way in the back was the Goodell Company, I believe. They also unloaded propane there at one time.
Maybe Coughlin had a coal business there.
Yeah.
And the Abbott Company used to use the freight station.
Right. So there was actually 3 buildings there. This was the passenger station, then the freight depot, and then...
That may be the Goodell Company really didn't have a building like that. They had a loading docks.
They had a loading dock and a sidetrack there, I believe.
Was there much eminent domain involved in gaining the railroad property, or was it all private purchase?
Was it a, what involved?
Eminent domain?
I
Or
don't
private
think so.
purchase.
I don't think so, not in those days. Not in those days. I think most of it was, they purchased the land, or made some kind of a deal with the landowner, and got the right of way through there. And of course, that's always been a sticking point with a lot of people. I remember when Wilton Scenic was putting a thing together to run from Wilton to Greenfield, and the guy that was doing that was the guy I worked for at the time, and he got into a dispute with somebody in Greenfield because they said they owned the railroad tracks. And he said, what makes you think that? And the guy said, well, when I bought the property, the people that owned the property before me told me that they owned the railroad tracks. It was kind of a touch and go there for a while, but he finally realized that they did not. They realized that they didn't own the railroad tracks, that the railroad had a right-of-way through there, and the state of New Hampshire actually owned the right-of-way. So.
Dale,
Yes.
question. I lived up the road from the depot. I lived on Depot Street. I grew up there. So I spent a lot of time at the depot as a kid with my parents going for walks along the track, whatever. And I know I have a photo of this somewhere, and I'm wondering if you know anything about it. About the time they were shutting the line down, or at least not shutting it down, but not using it very much in the late 60s, what I remember is a chrome diesel engine came through. It was a big deal. This big engine was kind of come through. A big, complete chrome engine, not like the old locomotives pulling passenger cars. Do you recollect that, or have any information, come across information of what that was?
Yankee football.
I think it may have been a pipe dream, but what you're talking about probably is the Flying Yankee, which was a stainless steel passenger train that the Boston and Maine owned. But you probably saw a Bud car, self-propelled. They called them RDCs. They were self-propelled cars built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, and they were used as passenger things. In 1964, one came up through, went all the way to Hillsborough, turned in Hillsborough, and went back to Nashua. And the reason I know that was I was on it.
I think I have a photo of it.
Yeah, and that was probably a fan trip for the railroad enthusiasts of New England, so.
Okay.
Yes,
Dale, did they, the day of the fire, the night of the fire at the green mill, did that ever get rebuilt at all? Or did it cease at that time?
no, that was the end of it.
That was
The end of it.
never reopened, so to speak.
There was nothing left.
Yeah.
It's always been suspicious about that fire because the fire chief had left town the night before that and was gone when it happened. And there was people that were saying that he may have had something to do with it. I know the captain over there at the time tried to blame it on the chief. I was a chief. And there's the captain sitting right there. But no, it was spontaneous combustion, and by the time the first fire truck rolled in there, the place was already gone. We knew that. We planned on it for years and years and years. We knew that there would be no saving it once it started. If you ever went up in those towers down there, you could see, look on the beams, and the dust was that thick on those beams from transferring all the grain around all those years and running the mixers and everything like that. So the main intention was always to protect the buildings around it. And I thought they were very, very fortunate to have houses that were so close to that place that received little or no damage whatsoever. And that goes back to the good work by the Fire Mutual Aid, the local fire department. The captain wasn't worth anything, but some of the other towns that came in, they did a great job. They really did.
What year was that?
That was 1976. Anything else?
What's the story on that engine in Greenfield?
There is no engine in Greenfield.
Oh, there isn't?
No.
Oh.
They moved it about 3 weeks ago. Milford Bennington bought that to use for parts. They took some parts of it, not many. It's, I think, supposed to be restored. They hauled it, a couple weeks ago, they hauled it down to Wilton. It's in a private location down there where people can't get to it, and there's a young man who decides he's going to fix it up and restore it, so we'll see. I hope he's got very, very deep pockets.
Any crashes on the Antrim-Bennington line?
Oh yeah, there was a few. I believe it was 1917, there was a passenger train turned over somewhere between the Bennington Paper Mill and the Antrim Depot. It had the Hancock High School's basketball team on it. They were on their way to Antrim to play a demonstration or demo game or something. No one was hurt. Can't think of anything else really happening on this line. One did happen between Peterborough and Hancock. It was a fatal crash down there where two steam engines came head on. It was a strange thing that happened. One engine and cars left Elmwood Depot at the exact same minute that the train left Peterborough Station. They weren't. One was a second section, which means they sent an engine through with some cars, and this second section was leaving Peterborough, and they came right head on down near where the bus company is. Right there that station was called Nahaw. It was a flag stop. It wasn't a real station. It was just a flag stop, and it killed, I think, 3 people from the Boston, Maine that were on those engines. I have several pictures of that. I got a written article about it that I wrote, and it was quite a thing because it happened right on 202. So the road was closed, and I gave one of these talks at Hancock Historical Society a few years ago, and this guy said to me, when I was a little kid, he said, I remember we were stopped there in my father's car. And he said, we couldn't move because they said the road was blocked. He said, so we walked up to see what it was, And he says, as soon as we get up close, he said, my father grabbed me and put us back in the car, and we turned around and went back to Hancock, so,
It's gonna be a while.
yeah. Yes,
Yeah, tell us about the runaway train from Jaffrey to Peterborough.
okay, 1969, I believe it was. They were shifting cars at W.W. Cross, the tack shop in Jaffrey. And they put 2 cars out on the main line, and they were back into the siding to switch more cars around, and the 2 cars started to roll. Well, the brakeman doing his job ran over and jumped on the car, but he jumped on the wrong ladder, so he couldn't get to the brake wheel, and he rode that thing to Peterborough. And that was a 25-mile-an-hour line at that time. They figured he reached speeds of somewhere around 75 miles an hour at different places. He crossed the state highway, I think, 3 or 4 different places. And when they got to Peterborough, one car hit what is now Bar Harbor Bank. The other one went across Main Street and hit a bunch of parked cars in front of what was the Cumberland Farm Store in those days. One of the cars was a brand new car that had just been picked up the day before that along the superintendent's schools. And of course, that totaled it. The ironic thing about that whole night was 10 minutes before they came into Peterborough, we were doing an adult education class in front of what was then the A&P. We had 3 fire trucks pumping out of the river down there. And we picked up all the hoses, we took the 3 trucks, went back to Peterborough. Peterborough Fire Station in those days was up on Main Street. We backed in front of the station, we were getting off the trucks and the fire whistle started blowing. The car was already across Main Street. If they'd come through 4 or 5 minutes earlier, it probably would have wiped out at least a couple of fire trucks and who knows how many firemen that were working around there on that project. So it was quite a thing. Yes?
Mine was the middle car.
Yours was the middle car? Have you got your insurance payment yet?
Another question. Growing up in rural Ohio, don't hold that against me, we had Barnum and Bailey come through every year in a very rural town.
Yeah.
Did that happen here?
That happened, it would come to probably Nashua or Manchester.
Okay.
But never came up this way. It might have gone to Concord at one time, but mostly Manchester.
Which is unusual because we were a very rural town, so we were out in the middle of nowhere. But we were between Cleveland and Akron, so
Yep.
that could have been part of the reason. But yeah, it was a great event every year. Yeah.
Anything else?
Last question.
Yes.
What's the condition of the trestle and the paper mill?
The trestle is there. I don't know how good a shape it's in. It's not good enough for passenger trains because they had talked about running the Milford, Bennington was talking about running a passenger train up there. It will not pass inspection for a passenger car. It might work for light freight cars, I don't know. It's pretty weak, it really is. So it's been there 150 years, so.
That'd be weak too.
What's that?
I'd be weak too.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, I've got some books with me. If you guys want to look at some pictures, I'll set them up on the table out there. You can look at them. If you have questions about them, be more than glad to answer them if I can. If I can't answer them, I'll tell you I don't know.